Hi again, everyone. I'm olliemathews. This is Societal Narcissism. This video is sponsored by contribution from Sunshine. Sunshine's last video was the narcissistic baby boomer thinks they're entitled to everything you own. Here's her story. Hi, Ollie. Thanks for bringing additional clarity to the money obsession. It helped make some connections, one in scripture and then in my cousin. I found a deep pain left unprocessed in my heart over what my mom did to her that caused a rift in the family. It helped to write it down and process the pain. You're right, it boils down to getting married. A spouse is another slice of the pie, their pie. A spouse has rights, recourse, and influence backed by legal, moral, and biblical precedents. I'm glad it blew up when my husband stepped in. The scripture parallel I see more clearly is Jacob's story in Genesis, which is a real doozy. It's topical for your channel in light of that Black Pastor video and the estranged parent reactions, which have been amazing helpful videos, by the way. That pastor speaks of what parents are due while hardly even cherry picking verses, let alone large sections of scripture. That is typical of many pastors. My family was Christian in claim only, therefore extreme hypocrites. Thankfully, I have great adult influences in a classical literature program as a teen that made it impossible for them to pull religious crap on me. I know more than my parents and they know it. I honestly think it's blasphemy to take credit for giving life by having sex. God gives life. The spark of divinity is through him, just as raising the dead among other miracles is through him. This is not our power. When you have faith in a creator or the spiritual in general, then it's more than sperm meets egg. It's not to our credit, it's God's will and design. I believe one of his greatest blessings and gifts to us is life. What God gives us, we are responsible for. Many narcs, including my mother, like to cut off responsibility for the state that their children the day they turn 18. What they did to you is your problem now. They are not responsible for the pain they cause and are absolved of arbitrary legal adult status. I have seen Christian borderlines drive their children to atheism. Those parents will be held accountable for that. Like you've always said, narcs think they are God and therefore do credit for God's glory and power, including creating life. Well, like I said, most narcissists who are Christians, these Christian Bible thumpers, are atheists. They don't believe in God. They believe they are God. The story of Jacob and Laban have been getting around some narcissism recovery circles. As believers and survivors, we now see what it's about. These dynamics are old news. Being raised in a family that claimed to be Christian, it helps me, especially after no contact. For those dealing with religious narcs, this story is especially validating. The confrontation is in Genesis 31. The father-in-law, Laban, tracked Jacob down after he left with his wives, children, livestock, and goods owed to him through deals and earnings during 2 decades of work. All that time being cheated wages, deals, and being deceived into marrying the wrong daughter, resulting in 7 more years in a deal to marry the younger daughter who he actually loved and was originally promised. Laban accused Jacob of stealing his idols, which the younger daughter had done, but Jacob did not know. They were the only items that belonged to Laban. They were his excuse. They were not found. I'll just copy the meltdown in verse 43 and 44. 43, and Laban answered and said unto Jacob, These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto my daughters or unto their children, which they have borne. 44, now therefore come now, let us make a covenant, and I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. It's all there, entitlement to everything and everyone, right? And that's why a narcissist will gravitate towards the Bible, towards religion, because there's these passages in it that they feel entitles them to all your stuff and to control over your life under God's punishment for disobeyal or disobedience. The complete outrage he had lost control. He basically asked what supply can he have now that Jacob has taken them away. I see a strong parallel in my dad's meltdown and entitlement to control his children and our fiancés, and my mom's entitlement to all that is quite literally mine, not hers. They would be no different towards grandkids. I'm glad we're far away. Exactly, because they feel under God they're entitled to it. Just best to get away and stay away. To resolve the conflict, they arranged stone markers and share a meal and a ceremony for peacemaking and boundary setting. Jacob was cut off with exactly what he had, and neither of them could cross the boundary. Laban did this to protect himself from further loss and create a border, implying, as we're all familiar with, that the boundary was necessary for his safety. Laban is an idol worshiper with no idol. Jacob is the one who walks with God. I love to see estranged religious narc parents try to beat their kids over the head with this story. It promotes no contact, boundaries, and property rights. Right, and look, in a book as large as the Bible, with as many stories and passages, Old Testament, New Testament, the Bible is there for, the Bible is used by narcissists to cherry pick what fits for them. They use what works and they ignore what doesn't. And that's basically how the narcissist goes through life anyway. Whether it's the Bible or whether it's just how they live personally, whether they're religious or not, the narcissist cherry picks what works for them and ignores what doesn't work for them. They can cry grandparents' rights all they want. What excuse would they make for this story? That idol worshiper parents can be treated this way. Did the story expire its relevancy because it's Old Testament? Maybe for them. For them, because it's in the Old Testament, it might. Well, let's say, that's Old Testament, not New Testament. We don't follow Old Testament, we follow New Testament. There is 1,000,001 loopholes that the narcissist will find to argue their way out of anything. Which is why it's just best to go no contact and stop trying to prove anything to the narcissist and trying to prove what they're saying is bullshit. This is for your own well-being. Don't ever try to argue this shit with your parents. Jacob literally packed up and left in the middle of the night without notice or explanation until Laban tracked him down and wouldn't leave them alone. Parents that got any warning or explanation should be grateful. They got more than they deserve. The story illustrates that labor, property, financial, and emotional abuse are all a valid reason to go no contact. It is perfectly acceptable to take what is yours, leave in secret if necessary, and cut contact for yourself and your family. The story even illustrates narc parents love to imply their victims have violent potential. It happened to me with my mom and little sister. I have wrestled trying to understand the motivation for that for a while now. After a few discussions, my husband and I think it's a combination. I think they were in their target position receiving this treatment, they would feel entitled to respond violently. They project that entitlement onto the target. Of course they do. The narcissist always assumes you're going to respond how they respond. They put their thought patterns, they project their thought patterns onto you. Like I said, if you want to know what the narcissist really is thinking and how they think, just sit back and listen to what they accuse you of. Because what they are telling you is what they would do and how they would act in your if they were you in your situation. It's a confession. It always is. Everything the narcissist does is a confession. I think another cause is victim mentality and more projection, fantasizing that they are so important and that their target is so twisted and evil that they will kill them. And everyone in the world would cry and be sad. Then they claim victim status and justify their fear and abuse. I'm sure there are other variables. This is just the best understanding at this time. I'd love some feedback. Well, we agree on that. That's what I just said. Everything the narcissist accuses you of is projection. It's what they think. You want to know what they think? Just listen to what they accuse you of. And then you know what they would do if the situations were reversed. It's a confession. Hearing you emphasize my parents' possessive greed also reminded me of my cousin. While I only have a few pieces of the puzzle, I think it paints a pretty full picture. She is older than my siblings and me. My uncle and aunt on my mother's side were 16 and 18 years older than my mom. Yep, my mom was an oops baby. My uncle passed in 2020, almost 3 years after they received their inheritance, as I recall. Uncle was in his 70s, a starving musician, so to speak, with extensive credits. He spent a few decades abusing drugs and alcohol, typical for the music scene. Spent much of his life being overweight and got divorced when cousin was in her tweens, as I recall. Looking back at his discography, I realized my mom played up how overweight he was and for how much of his life. Yeah, he was overweight, but he was not morbidly obese for the majority of his life, just the last 2 decades. I've always suspected mom played up his weight and substance abuse. She had no direct knowledge of how bad it was. She wasn't there. And again, that's out of raw jealousy. That behavior out of your mother is raw jealousy. Oh, he's just this fat drug addict. That's to make herself look better because she feels like a loser. Uncle never remarried. He just drug a few girlfriends around, the last of which turned into an elder abuse situation as she was older than him and started to suffer dementia, or perhaps just brain rot being with an ass of a man. No proper funeral arrangements were made due to the time frame that he passed. My family hardly spoke of him during or after his passing. Biggest thing was playing some of his music over Christmas. Honestly, I doubt there would have been much to it if we could freely hold a funeral. Both my aunt, who is still alive, and uncle could stand to read for filth. Just different flavors of boomers. My mom has a few stories she regurgitates dozens of times about uncle. One from her being 5. One from her being 5 years old. It was a spat about the TV. She had been watching cartoons. He wanted to put another program on. He grabbed her hand. She claims he bent her hand all the way back and she cried. She said then he went into his room to play his instrument to cover up the sound of me crying, which I think is a dumb take on him walking away because it wasn't worth it. She cheerily said he moved out as soon after, as if that event directly resulted in him being kicked out. She enjoys telling that part of the story. She also said he turned 18 soon after. Sounds like your mother lied. Sounds like your mother was jealous of him her entire life. That's what it seems like. I'd say he had a career suited to another area. I tend to think he moved out because he could, and it was the best for his career. I think my mother inflates her sense of self-importance, thinking their parents kicked him out over her. Yeah, because your mother has to be on top at all times. Your mother lives in Fantasyland, where she is, listen, your mother is an oops baby, okay? An oops baby boomer who lives, she is the queen of Fantasyland, the princess of Fantasyland in her own mind. And that's how basically she's been living her life, as princess of Fantasyland. In 2018, Mom went to his city for my Miata. If you think boomer Corvette whores are bad, have you noticed boomers and Miatas? Talk about possessive. Someday I'll write about boomers and cars. I've got stories. They still make Miatas, Mazda Miatas. They were pretty cheap cars from what I remember, but it was like a cheap way, like a Mazda Miata was like the poor man's vet to me. It was a convertible. Didn't have much power. They weren't very well made cars. I didn't even think they still made Miatas in 2018. We visited my uncle to stay the night because Mom is too paranoid for hotels. That night I watched Mom bring up the same TV story from when she was 5 years old. By then, the story was 5.5 decades old. To my uncle's credit, he shut her down immediately. Mom was insanely petty with him. I think she always thought he deserved worse in life than what he had, and he was barely getting by. Another thing she always liked to complain about was she made a 5-second piano jingle, and she claims he stole it and put it in a song. I never heard proof of this. My mother was never a career musician, and I think she was severely jealous of his C-list fame and high skill as a musician. Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. This comes off as a woman who is just jealous of him since she was a kid. There was another story Mom relished in involving her brother. Even as a child, I always thought she got off on this one from the look in her eyes. It involved dick and attention. She was 16 visiting him with their parents. They went to a house party with mostly musicians. It was a fairly tame party. Sounded like musicians gathered there regularly to play and record. She was playing pool with a famous rock star, as she put it. I recall thinking he was B-list. I can't remember his name now. He was known among musicians for trying to get into the pants of very young women. Mom could tell he was into her, and she really liked that attention. My mom would recall with a glint and smile how her brother hollered from the studio in the other room, "Hey, X, watch it. That's my little sister you're talking to there." The guy didn't try anything after that. Oh, wow. So she's 16 trying to bang some adult guitar, who knows, some B-list musician, and she's mad that her brother cock-blocked her. Sounds like a guy who would have bent her arm back, though, right? Trying to keep some adult musician from banging his 16-year-old sister. Your mother is princess of fairyland, of Fantasyland. I mean, that's just how she goes through her life. I know my mom didn't call herself saved until her 20s, but she continued to get off on these sort of interactions throughout her life and vicariously through us 3 daughters. She relived them often to continue to get off on them, saying, "Before I was Christian," before regaling her glory days. My mom's sexual mentality could be a story on its own. She wasn't uncomfortable, grossed out, or scared in that situation like I would have been. By the glint in her eyes and smile, she really liked the fact that both that musician and her brother acknowledged that there was a sexual situation, and her being the object of desire, princess of fairyland. She never got past this. To me, the Christianity is just a cover for her being a fucking whore, to be honest with you. She liked that she could play the game with this musician and be a tease, while her brother was present to ensure he never crossed the line, and presumably intervene if he tried. Growing up, I never got the impression she retold the story to cite a positive to her brother's character, or as an example to us how men should protect women in their lives, setting a bar for her oldest child, our brother, to look out for us. I only ever got the impression she gets off on it. Yeah, because she's in competition again. She's probably another borderline in competition, and wants you to know how hot she was, how she could get men, adult men, musicians were after her, and she doesn't even realize in all her bragging is there contradictions in the stories of how she's presenting her brother as this abusive guy, hurting her over cartoons, but then at the same time, protecting her from an adult at 16 years old. I think my mom has envious eyes around fame. Growing up, my mother often expressed delusional fantasies about how my little sister and I have star power or star potential with greedy, glinting eyes and a wry smile. I told you, Fantasyland. I told you your mother is the queen of Fantasyland. She's not even the princess. She's the queen of Fantasyland. Probably she just wants to get rich and famous so she could cash in. I pulled back heavily in my teens with sharing my music and creative talents, which got negative feedback from both parents, validating my suspicion they only cared about me so long that they could show me off. Exactly. Look, your parents from your last video are obviously all about your assets and money, and they're entitled to everything. So of course, they think that they can cash in on whatever talent you have. They don't want you getting married because that's another slice of the money pie. So on that same vein, they think if they think you're musically talented, they're looking to cash in on that because they're entitled to that as well. I was tired of being a dog and pony show with my little sister during the holidays. This aspect of my life is probably fit for its own story. Needless to say, my cousin had it hard just like we did. Narc dad, divorced parents, mom's a bit off as well, but I'm not aware of any abuse there. She's a sweet, intelligent woman, high-performance athlete for many years and accomplished in her career. Struggling with student debt because her parents didn't plan anything for her or help. I wish I had more time with her growing up. I wish it was possible to have a relationship as an adult. The odds are poor. When Uncle passed, cousin was his sole heir. My uncle was not a wealthy man. By boomer standards, the guy was straight up broke. The house he lived in, he rented from his ex-wife. He had a chunk of liquid assets only as a result of a recent inheritance, instruments, equipment, but not much else. Uncle's inheritance was life-altering to him given his age and needs. Depending on how much he ate through in almost 3 years after taxes, bills, and other costs, at best, it wouldn't have been much more than some savings in terms of an inheritance for cousin. Cousin was low to no contact with her father for many years. I totally understand why. I would not want my uncle, who was much more overt, to have been more in my life, let alone be my parent. Mom took it upon herself to call cousin and remind her at least one Father's Day and one birthday that I know of to call her dad. The second event, cousin snapped at her. Good for her. When Mom complained about it, I reminded her of her own complaints against her brother. Being raised by him, cousin has a much different and worse relationship. That limited her ranting, at least. Mom loves sticking her nose in places to claim to be a good person, then a victim when she's finally put in line. After Uncle passed, my mom's attitude leads me to think she may have communicated or tried to communicate a few more times. It could, by my mother dreaming up offensive interpretations, or perhaps cousin never responded. Could be a lot of things. Who knows, because your mother lives in Fantasyland. And she thinks she gets to do in Fantasyland, you get to do whatever you want. You get to say whatever you want. Unfortunately, once the veil of Fantasyland is lifted, she gets slapped back basically gets slapped back to reality. She don't like it, and now she's the victim again. Several months after Uncle passed, cousin came up in conversation. Mom went off with a literal snarl and look of contempt. quoting to the best of my memory, "Yeah, she's probably not coming over. Well, I'm sure she's doing just fine. She'll probably never see me again. She took her $500,000 and ran, and she'll probably never speak to me again." Again, she's just after money. Listen, your mother thinks she's entitled to everything, to everybody's money. She wants it for herself. I responded, "You mean her inheritance? She received her own inheritance?" My mom tried to double down. I retorted, "The money she received because her dad died. You mean that money?" She clammed up after that. "Yeah, I bet she did, but she thought you'd just go along with it. She expects everybody to go along with it because, she's preaching from Fantasyland." And then when you push back, like, "So wait, you want her inheritance? Is that what you're complaining about?" There was a second time she went off about it, which I remember exact words. Same rant I repeated 3 times, interrupting her. "Shut your mouth, shut your mouth, shut your mouth." My dad was sitting between us. The third time he glared at me and said, "You shouldn't talk to your mother that way." I immediately responded, "She's the reason we don't get to have a relationship with cousin." He said nothing to that. Without him popping off at me, Mom gave up complaining. My uncle inherited that $500K. After tax and a few years living off it, God knows what petty sum was left to cousin post his bills and inheritance taxes. To your point about the pie, all my cunt mother sees is cousin is a piece of the pie she took off and ran with, which of course is an inflated lie. But that's how they think. That's how they think. Even though that's his daughter, she thinks she's entitled to that money. And it doesn't matter the reality. You got to pay taxes and living expenses and God knows what. It's always going to be $500,000. And whatever it could have been $499,999 left. She'd have bitched about the dollar that was missing. Because that's what they do. All the money moves my parents made with my accounts, they never happened. Bank statements to be damned. But cousin managed to take the entire pre-tax sum of her father's inheritance after his passing, and yet be so ungrateful to my mother she hardly spoke to her again. Funny how things work in borderline land or fantasy land. Exactly. So you already understand your mother's living in an alternate reality that she is the queen of. My mother has another story about her brother she has retold dozens of times. That when their parents were setting up their will, they considered cutting him out, primarily due to his history of substance abuse, but over the decades, he had borrowed quite a bit of money, at least once, even from Mom, claiming he couldn't buy groceries. He never paid back what he borrowed. My mom claims she interjected on his behalf, and they settled for giving him a smaller fraction. I think I understand it now that you pointed it out in other places. Her brother's inheritance was credit to her, therefore her money, and by extension, cousin's inheritance was credit to her, making it her money. Right. No matter what, how many degrees of separation she needs to make to make that money hers, she's going to make it. Because that's how it works in Fantasyland. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the money. It's all about the money. The fact that cousin dared to be ungrateful to her, to cut contact with her, to not answer to her, and to not tolerate none of her entitlement or flying monkey behavior makes cousin worthy of contempt. In her mind, of course it does. She's going to find a reason, no matter what. My mother shattered things so badly I never got a response from cousin when I reached out after uncle passed. I've been pondering reaching out now just to let her know I miss her and love her. I cut contact myself, and I respect and understand now more than ever that she's done the same. That is assuming her number is still good. I guess I have to think about it more. Thanks again, Ollie, sunshine. It wouldn't hurt. Like, you don't have an issue with her. And I would tell her, like, look, I've cut my mother out too. I understand. I cut my mother out. All she looks at, she puts a dollar sign on everybody. She puts a dollar value on everybody and then thinks she's entitled to that amount. So And I'd be like, whatever money you got, you are entitled to, and it is yours. Like, you are absolutely, it's all your money. You don't, like, nobody is entitled to that, period. Like, I just want to know how you're doing, and that's it. I'm not looking for anything other than to let you know I don't talk to my mother anymore either, for the same reasons you don't talk to her. But at the end of the day, sunshine, okay, you have to understand your mother is living as queen of Fantasyland. And the thing about Fantasyland, anything can happen. Because it's a fantasy. It's not real. It's not reality. So things don't even need to make sense in Fantasyland, so long as the queen gets everything she believes she's entitled to. So, I hope that helps. Thank you so much, Sunshine, for another contribution and story. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, something you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up a Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the Cash App, Zelle, PayPal, and email links in the description box below. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. Also, be sure to subscribe to both my channels on Rumble. Follow me on Twitter and Telegram as well. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been Societal Narcissism. Take care, everyone.